Hey everyone, welcome to my channel where the strange, the unexplained, and the downright creepy come to life. From real-life encounters with the paranormal to bizarre, true stories that'll keep you up at night, I bring you the eerie tales you won't hear anywhere else. If you're into late-night chills, mysterious happenings, and things that go bump in the night, you're in the right place. Subscribe, buckle up, and let's dive into the unknown. The smell hits first, metallic, acrid. It climbs into your nostrils and settles behind your eyes like a headache waiting to bloom. I stood in the doorway of what had once been my grandfather's study, paintbrush dripping, forgotten in my hand, staring at the corner where wall met floor. The floorboards there were darker than the rest, swollen with moisture that had no business being in a room I'd spent 3 weeks meticulously waterproofing. I'd bought the house 6 months after Grandpa Joe passed, drawn by memories of summer visits and the promise of a fresh start somewhere that felt like home. The study had been last on my renovation list. A cramped, book-lined cave that smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. But standing there that October evening, watching shadows lengthen across the freshly painted eggshell white walls, I realized I might have made a mistake leaving it for last. The stain was roughly the size of a dinner plate, its edges irregular and organic, like spilled coffee left to spread and dry, except it wasn't dry. When I knelt and pressed my palm against the wood, my hand came away damp. The moisture was cold, thicker than it should have been. The acrid smell intensified, making my eyes water. I spent the next hour pulling up floorboards, expecting a burst pipe or evidence of a long-forgotten leak. Instead, I found dry subflooring and solid beams. Bone dry, despite the October rains hammering the roof for days. The moisture seemed to be seeping up from nowhere or everywhere, through wood that showed no sign of water damage. That night, I moved my mattress into the study. The rest of the house still felt too empty, too full of echoes and rooms that remembered voices I'd never hear again. The study, despite everything, felt safer somehow, contained. I positioned the mattress against the far wall, as far from the stain as space allowed, and tried to convince myself that morning would bring answers. I woke to the sound of my name, not shouted, not called, whispered, like wind through leaves. Marcus, just that, soft, persistent. I might have imagined it, caught in that liminal space between sleep and waking. I lay still, listening, to the house settling around me, the tick of the old radiator, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The smell was stronger now. That sharp, metallic tang curled in my stomach. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, and when light flooded the study, I saw the stain had grown. Not dramatically, just a few inches in each direction, spreading like spilled ink across the boards. But it was bigger, darker, and when I approached on unsteady legs, it was still wet, still seeping that thick, cold moisture with no source, no reason. I spent the next day researching foundation issues, calling contractors, pricing dehumidifiers. The internet offered explanations. Condensation, seasonal settling, crawl space ventilation. Logical, reasonable, all of them failing to explain why the moisture felt wrong on my skin, why it left a residue soap couldn't wash away. The second night, the whisper came earlier. I wasn't even fully asleep when I heard it. My name, again, but closer, as if the speaker had moved from across the room to just beside my bed. I kept my eyes shut, told myself it was the pipes, the house settling, anything but what it sounded like. But when the whisper came again, I felt breath against my ear, cool, damp, and carrying that same sickly tang that had begun to seep into everything. I bolted upright, heart hammering. Alone. The stain had grown again, tendrils crawling toward the center of the room, following the grain of the wood like dark veins. I grabbed a flashlight and inspected every inch of the walls and ceiling. Nothing. No cracks. No intrusion. Just the floor, creeping with damp that rose from within. By the third night, I'd had enough. I dragged the mattress to the living room, near the front windows where streetlight could keep the shadows at bay. Told myself I was being rational, practical. Why sleep in a damp room when I had a whole house? But in the morning, I found a new stain on the living room floor, smaller but unmistakable. That same dark, wet patch directly beneath where I'd slept. I moved to the guest bedroom. It followed. Then to the master bedroom. Again it followed. Each morning brought new evidence. Fresh patches of the impossible. Dampness always beneath where I'd laid my head. Always accompanied by the whisper, which had begun to sound less like wind and more like a voice. Urgent, hungry, and increasingly hard to dismiss. I stopped sleeping altogether. 3 days of pacing the house in a haze of caffeine and desperation, researching everything from supernatural manifestations to rare molds to psychological disorders that might explain hallucinations. None of it helped, because the stain kept spreading, and the voice kept calling. I called my doctor and made an appointment I couldn't afford. I submitted myself to a battery of tests that found nothing wrong, aside from elevated stress hormones and severe sleep deprivation. But the stains continued to spread, not just where I tried to sleep, but throughout the house, appearing at random like some infection creeping through the bones of the building. I found them in the kitchen, rising from beneath the sink. In the hallway, they spread across the hardwood like spilled wine. In the bathroom, dark patches wept moisture into freshly washed towels. And always that smell. Always the whispers, no longer just at night, but now in daylight too. Soft voices, emanating from the stains themselves, calling my name with growing frequency and volume. I hired a contractor. He found nothing wrong. No issues with the foundation, nothing faulty in the plumbing, nothing that could explain moisture appearing in places no water had any business being. He suggested I call someone about black mold, gave me a number for a remediation specialist, and left, shaking his head at problems that didn't make sense. The specialist found no mold, no bacteria, no fungal growth of any kind. He took samples of the moisture, promised to have them analyzed, and called me 3 days later with results that only deepened the mystery. The liquid wasn't water. Not exactly. It contained mineral traces that didn't belong in this region. Organic compounds that didn't match any known substance in his database. Honestly, he said, voice uncertain, the bewilderment of a man whose expertise had failed him. I've never seen anything like it. It's not quite from here, if that makes any sense. None of it made sense. But I was starting to suspect that sense had nothing to do with what was happening in my grandfather's house. On the 7th night, or what would have been the 7th night if I'd still been sleeping, I found myself back in the study, staring at the original stain. It had now consumed nearly half the floor. The smell was overwhelming, thick enough to taste. Metallic, organic, and wrong in ways that made my skin crawl. The whispers had become constant. A murmur of dozens of voices, overlapping in a relentless chorus, speaking my name with the persistence of prayer. I knelt beside the largest patch of dampness and pressed my palm to it. Cold, thick moisture seeped between my fingers. The whispers swelled louder, more urgent, and for a moment, I could almost make out words beneath the repetition of my name. Fragments of meaning, slipping away like half-remembered dreams. What do you want? I asked the darkness, feeling foolish, desperate, beyond caring about either. The whispers stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own breathing, harsh, rapid, straining in the oppressive air. Then, slowly, a single voice emerged from the quiet, clearer than the others, more solid. It carried weight and purpose that made the hair on my arms rise. Sleep, it said, just one word, spoken with the hunger of something that had waited far too long to feed. I understood then, with the clarity that comes from crossing the threshold between reason and pure instinct. Whatever was in the house, whatever was spreading through its floors and walls with each passing night, it didn't want my death. It didn't want my pain. It wanted something more intimate, the vulnerability of unconsciousness, the defenseless state of sleep, where the barrier between self and other grows thin. It had been patient, following me from room to room, waiting for exhaustion to overcome fear. But patience has limits, and I could feel those limits fraying in the air, felt it in the way the stains pulsed with a rhythm all their own. I ran, not just from the study, but from the house itself. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and nothing else, fleeing into the October night like a man chased by demons. I drove until I found a highway motel, paid cash for a room, and collapsed onto the institutional bedding. It smelled of bleach and other people's dreams. And when I woke 8 hours later, refreshed for the first time in a week, I found a small dark stain on the carpet beside the bed, still damp, still carrying that familiar metallic tang, still whispering my name in the morning light. Now I sit in my car, parked at a rest stop 200 miles from anywhere that matters. The sun is setting through the windshield, and I see my reflection, hollow-eyed, stubbled, twitching at sounds that might be whispers carried on the evening breeze. The passenger seat is damp. I haven't slept in 36 hours, but exhaustion pulls at me with gravity I can't resist much longer. My eyes burn, my hands shake, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I hear that voice again. Patient, hungry, insistent, sleep, that's all it ever wanted. And maybe in the morning, I'll understand that some hungers are older than houses, deeper than foundations, and persistent enough to follow a man to the ends of the earth, if that's what it takes to feed. The dampness is spreading across the upholstery now, seeping into the fabric with that same impossible persistence. And I know, with the certainty of someone who has run out of places to run, that distance means nothing to whatever has made me its chosen host. The whispers are getting louder. I close my eyes, just for a moment, and feel the darkness lean in, patient and hungry and finally ready to collect what it's owed. The rusted hinges of the barn door screamed as we forced it open, releasing decades of trapped air thick with motor oil and decay. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, slanting through gaps in the weathered siding, illuminating a graveyard of forgotten automobiles. Marcus had promised us treasure, vintage parts for the restoration projects that consumed our weekends. But standing in that doorway, I felt only the weight of something watching from the shadows between the hulking metal carcasses. "This is it," Marcus said, his voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "Uncle Jerry's collection. Been sitting here since he passed, 15 years ago." The barn stretched further back than I expected. Row upon row of vehicles stood in varying states of decay, some stripped to their frames, others complete but abandoned, their chrome dulled and paint faded to ghosts of former colors. The air was thick with rust, leather, and something else I couldn't place. Something organic, something wrong. Danny whistled low beside me, already making his way toward a powder blue pickup that might once have been beautiful. But my attention was drawn to the far corner, where a dark sedan sat apart from the others. A canvas tarp had slipped halfway off, revealing a sleek profile that seemed somehow more intact than the rest. More present. "You guys start looking around," I told them, not wanting to admit the strange pull I felt toward that distant car. "I'll check out the back section." My footsteps echoed hollow on the concrete floor as I moved between the rows. The sedan grew larger with each step. A late 50s model, maybe a Buick or Chrysler. Its black paint had somehow retained an impossible amount of luster, considering the years. The tarp had fallen completely from the rear, pooling on the ground like shed skin. The trunk was slightly ajar. I paused a few feet away, suddenly aware of how quiet it had become. Marcus and Danny's voices were distant now, muffled by the maze of metal. The silence pressed in on my eardrums with a physical weight. Even the birds, the wind, the faint hum of the county road outside gone. The trunk lid was open maybe 6 inches, just enough to show a sliver of impenetrable darkness inside. No, not quite impenetrable. As my eyes adjusted, I thought I saw something gleaming in there. Chrome, maybe, or glass. I reached for the lid, then hesitated. The rational part of me offered explanations. The latch was broken. The contents had shifted over time. The gleam was just a trick of the light filtering through the barn's gaps. But beneath that voice was a whisper of unease, slithering beneath my skin. The metal of the trunk lid was warm under my palm. Not sun-warm. We were deep in the barn, well away from any direct light. Body warm, like something living had touched it. I lifted the lid. 2 flashlights lay inside, chrome bodies catching the dim light. Both were on, casting steady, pale beams upward. The batteries should have been long dead, corroded to uselessness in the humid barn air. but the light was clean, white, and impossible. "Marcus," I called, not taking my eyes off the flashlights. "Danny, you need to see this." No answer. The barn had fallen into the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, but nothing else. I reached toward one of the flashlights, then pulled my hand back. The metal would be warm. I knew it. Warm like the trunk lid. Warm like something had held it recently, carried it, used it. A sound broke the silence. A low rumble behind me. I spun around, the dark sedan now at my back, and peered through the maze of dead cars. The sound came again, closer, an engine turning over, trying to catch, a coughing sputter, a motor that hadn't run in years, trying to remember how. "Marcus," I called louder this time. "Danny." The engine noise cut out. Then another sound. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving between the cars. But not toward me. Circling. Maintaining distance. Keeping a screen of metal and shadow between us. I turned back to the sedan. The trunk was still open. The flashlights still glowed with their steady, impossible light. One had rolled slightly, its beam now pointed toward the back of the car. In that circle of illumination, I saw that the rear window was clear. No dust, no grime. Unlike every other vehicle in the barn, it was clean. Clean enough to see through. Clean enough for something to see out. The footsteps stopped. The barn felt hollow, like the other cars had shifted away, leaving me alone with the sedan. I couldn't hear Marcus or Danny anymore. Couldn't hear anything but my own ragged breathing and the low hum of flashlights that should have died decades ago. I slammed the trunk shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the dead space. And in its wake, I heard the engine again. Not behind me this time. The barn was impossibly still, yet filled with a quiet momentum that trembled just beneath its skin. Dust hung in the beams of light like ancient pollen, and from the trunk of that idle sedan, a glow throbbed like the pulse of a sleeping animal. I stared down into it, motionless, not because I was afraid, but because something deeper was anchoring me, something old and rehearsed. Action. The world beyond the car faded, its noises dwindling to soft clicks, distant and artificial, like a recording played behind a wall. The faint churning of the sedan's engine became the only reliable sound, low, patient, barely perceptible. And through that mechanical purring came a new realization, something that didn't come from the car or the barn, but from somewhere inside me. A question that sliced through the fog like a scalpel. Monologue. How long had it been since Marcus first mentioned his uncle's barn? How long since we made the decision to drive out here, across county lines, through mist-wrapped valleys and fading memories? Couldn't remember. Not clearly. The memory slipped when I reached for it, like wet paper disintegrating in my grasp. It wasn't just unclear, it felt wrong, distant, like a scene from someone else's dream that I had mistaken for one of my own. There was a familiarity to it, yes, but not the kind that comes from repetition. No, this was the eerie certainty of déjà vu layered on top of something more ancient and forgotten. The glow in the trunk pulsed again, soft, almost maternal, and my heart responded in kind, slow and reverent. It was calling me home, to a place I had never been, but one I recognized in the bones, in the marrow. The engine whispered invitations I couldn't translate, but somehow understood in feeling alone, and I stood there on the threshold of the trunk like I had done before. So many times before. The moment extended, elastic and eternal, stretched between climbing in and pulling away, between surrender and escape. I had made this choice again and again, always reaching this exact place, with Marcus and the others murmuring just beyond the reach of comprehension, coaxing me from a depth that shouldn't have existed. And yet it did. Time didn't work right here. It unraveled, reknitted, looped. It was patient. The sedan could wait for me forever, humming softly, offering sanctuary or sacrifice. I could no longer tell. This place, the barn, the glow, the endless returning. It existed for this moment. And I was its guest, or maybe its prisoner. The voices from below began to fade like the last notes of a dying song. The lights flickered like fireflies in the dark, and I remained motionless, suspended on the edge of a choice I no longer understood, while the ancient engine whispered my name through metal lungs, promising only that it would be here, always, until I remembered what I was here to do. Scene. Elsewhere, outside memory, outside reason, a different house waited. A roof baking under the October sun, caught heat like a pan on a stove. The air was too warm for the season, and the house beneath that roof too quiet for comfort. But the silence was not peace. It was tension. Pause before an inhale. Action. The hammer slipped again, my sweat-slicked palm losing grip for the third time that morning. It skittered down the roof's incline with a shriek before catching in the gutter, wobbling there like a warning. I swore softly, wiping my hands on denim stained with dust and worry. I retrieved the tool with care, like it might bite me, and glanced across the landscape of shingle and shadow. This was supposed to be a 2-day job, replace a few worn tiles, patch a few leaks, but the second week had arrived like a trespasser, uninvited and impossible to dismiss. Monologue. Something was wrong with the house. Not just the creaks, not just the tools that vanished or the shipments that arrived in pieces or with the wrong labels. Not just the sudden storms that drove me off the roof right when I found my rhythm. No, it was the waiting that got to me. The sense that something inside the house was expecting something. Watching. The repetitive rhythm of laying shingles had always soothed me before, but today the pattern felt brittle, forced. Every movement seemed echoed by something beneath. My ears kept straining for noises I told myself didn't exist. My eyes kept catching motion at the edge of vision, the same way a hunter sees the twitch of a tail in tall grass. Then it came, a dull thunk, heavy and final. It came from directly beneath me, from the attic. A boot on old wood, a sound too deliberate to dismiss. I froze, hammer raised, pulse spiking. My mind scrambled for explanations, settling wood, expansion and contraction, but none of them fit the weight of that sound. Another step, then another, measured, intentional, from the far side of the attic, where Grandma's sewing room had been, toward me. I had checked the house before climbing. Every room, every window locked, alarm set. The place was dead, sealed, but something was moving inside it now. Slowly, I dropped flat against the shingles, ear to the roof. The steps were steady, approaching. The wood beneath me quivered with faint vibrations. Then they stopped. Right below me, I stopped breathing, counting heartbeats. 10, 20, 30, silence. Then the footsteps resumed, but now they circled. Around and around like something pacing a cage. I fumbled my phone from my pocket, fingers slick with panic. I had to record it. I had to prove I wasn't imagining things. The app opened slowly, agonizingly slow. I hit record just as I heard a crack. Sharp, dry, like wood snapping under sudden pressure. But it came from below. I stared in horror as a patch of shingles 3 feet to my left sagged. Subtly, but undeniably. Something pressed up from the attic ceiling, distorting the rooftop by inches. A weight that had no business being there. The wood groaned, flexing, accepting the pressure. My camera caught it all. The bending roofline, the soft creaks, the silence that screamed. Then pop, the depression vanished. The roof rebounded to normal like nothing had happened. But the footsteps didn't stop. They began circling again, following, tracking. Every time I moved to a new part of the roof, the thing below adjusted. Step for step, second by second. It mirrored me, knew my pattern, my rhythm, my breath. I kept working. Not because I was brave, but because I didn't know what else to do. The heat rose with the afternoon, the shingles scalding beneath my knees. My sweat blurred my vision, burned my eyes, and still, it tracked me. A presence I could not name, pacing inside the skeleton of my childhood home, beneath insulation and forgotten photo albums, beneath memories and rot. It knew me, it waited, and it was learning. The barn was impossibly still, yet filled with a quiet momentum that trembled just beneath its skin. Dust hung in the beams of light like ancient pollen, and from the trunk of that idle sedan, a glow throbbed like the pulse of a sleeping animal. I stared down into it, motionless, not because I was afraid, but because something deeper was anchoring me, something old and rehearsed. Action. The world beyond the car faded, its noises dwindling to soft clicks, distant and artificial, like a recording played behind a wall. The faint churning of the sedan's engine became the only reliable sound, low, patient, barely perceptible. And through that mechanical purring came a new realization, something that didn't come from the car or the barn, but from somewhere inside me. A question that sliced through the fog like a scalpel. Monologue. How long had it been since Marcus first mentioned his uncle's barn? How long since we made the decision to drive out here, across county lines, through mist-wrapped valleys and fading memories? Couldn't remember. Not clearly. The memory slipped when I reached for it, like wet paper disintegrating in my grasp. It wasn't just unclear, it felt wrong, distant, like a scene from someone else's dream that I had mistaken for one of my own. There was a familiarity to it, yes, but not the kind that comes from repetition. No, this was the eerie certainty of déjà vu layered on top of something more ancient and forgotten. The glow in the trunk pulsed again, soft, almost maternal, and my heart responded in kind, slow and reverent. It was calling me home, to a place I had never been, but one I recognized in the bones, in the marrow. The engine whispered invitations I couldn't translate, but somehow understood in feeling alone, and I stood there on the threshold of the trunk like I had done before. So many times before. The moment extended, elastic and eternal, stretched between climbing in and pulling away, between surrender and escape. I had made this choice again and again, always reaching this exact place, with Marcus and the others murmuring just beyond the reach of comprehension, coaxing me from a depth that shouldn't have existed. And yet it did. Time didn't work right here. It unraveled, reknitted, looped. It was patient. The sedan could wait for me forever, humming softly, offering sanctuary or sacrifice. I could no longer tell. This place, the barn, the glow, the endless returning. It existed for this moment. And I was its guest, or maybe its prisoner. The voices from below began to fade like the last notes of a dying song. The lights flickered like fireflies in the dark, and I remained motionless, suspended on the edge of a choice I no longer understood, while the ancient engine whispered my name through metal lungs, promising only that it would be here, always, until I remembered what I was here to do. Scene. Elsewhere, outside memory, outside reason, a different house waited. A roof baking under the October sun, caught heat like a pan on a stove. The air was too warm for the season, and the house beneath that roof too quiet for comfort. But the silence was not peace. It was tension. Pause before an inhale. Action. The hammer slipped again, my sweat-slicked palm losing grip for the third time that morning. It skittered down the roof's incline with a shriek before catching in the gutter, wobbling there like a warning. I swore softly, wiping my hands on denim stained with dust and worry. I retrieved the tool with care, like it might bite me, and glanced across the landscape of shingle and shadow. This was supposed to be a 2-day job, replace a few worn tiles, patch a few leaks, but the second week had arrived like a trespasser, uninvited and impossible to dismiss. Monologue. Something was wrong with the house. Not just the creaks, not just the tools that vanished or the shipments that arrived in pieces or with the wrong labels. Not just the sudden storms that drove me off the roof right when I found my rhythm. No, it was the waiting that got to me. The sense that something inside the house was expecting something. Watching. The repetitive rhythm of laying shingles had always soothed me before, but today the pattern felt brittle, forced. Every movement seemed echoed by something beneath. My ears kept straining for noises I told myself didn't exist. My eyes kept catching motion at the edge of vision, the same way a hunter sees the twitch of a tail in tall grass. Then it came, a dull thunk, heavy and final. It came from directly beneath me, from the attic. A boot on old wood, a sound too deliberate to dismiss. I froze, hammer raised, pulse spiking. My mind scrambled for explanations, settling wood, expansion and contraction, but none of them fit the weight of that sound. Another step, then another, measured, intentional, from the far side of the attic, where Grandma's sewing room had been, toward me. I had checked the house before climbing. Every room, Every window locked, alarm set. The place was dead, sealed. But something was moving inside it now. Slowly, I dropped flat against the shingles, ear to the roof. The steps were steady, approaching. The wood beneath me quivered with faint vibrations. Then they stopped. Right below me, I stopped breathing, counting heartbeats. 10, 20, 30. Silence. Then the footsteps resumed, but now they circled. Around and around like something pacing a cage. I fumbled my phone from my pocket, fingers slick with panic. I had to record it. I had to prove I wasn't imagining things. The app opened slowly, agonizingly slow. I hit record just as I heard a crack. Sharp, dry, like wood snapping under sudden pressure. But it came from below. I stared in horror as a patch of shingles 3 feet to my left sagged. Subtly, but undeniably. Something pressed up from the attic ceiling, distorting the rooftop by inches. A weight that had no business being there. The wood groaned, flexing, accepting the pressure. My camera caught it all. The bending roofline, the soft creaks, the silence that screamed. Then pop, the depression vanished. The roof rebounded to normal like nothing had happened. But the footsteps didn't stop. They began circling again, following, tracking. Every time I moved to a new part of the roof, the thing below adjusted. Step for step, second by second. It mirrored me, knew my pattern, my rhythm, my breath. I kept working. Not because I was brave, but because I didn't know what else to do. The heat rose with the afternoon, the shingles scalding beneath my knees. My sweat blurred my vision, burned my eyes, and still, it tracked me. A presence I could not name, pacing inside the skeleton of my childhood home, beneath insulation and forgotten photo albums, beneath memories and rot. It knew me, it waited, and it was learning. I called out to whatever was in the attic. I didn't shout, I didn't whisper. It was a trembling, uncertain voice, half defiance, half desperate plea. I told it I knew it was there, that I had heard it moving, pacing, scratching. I said I wasn't afraid, but I was. I asked what it wanted, why it was following me, why it had chosen this house, this roof, this moment to become real. The response came immediately, and it was not what I expected. It wasn't a crash or a scream or some theatrical outburst of fury. No, it was worse. Every sound stopped. The footsteps, the scratching, that strange, ever-present low hum, like a vibration in the bones of the house. All of it just ceased. Silence dropped over the world like a shroud. A thick, unnatural stillness that didn't feel like quiet but like absence. Absence of life, of motion, of time. I swear even the wind outside paused. The birds fell silent. It was as if the entire world had inhaled and refused to exhale. Then came the tapping. Slow, deliberate, directly beneath my feet. Tap, tap, tap. 3 distinct strikes on the attic floorboards, spaced with eerie precision. Then a pause. Then 3 more. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It wasn't some creaking timber giving way. This was patterned, structured, intelligent. It was responding to me, acknowledging me. Whatever was up there had heard my question, and this was its answer. The tapping continued, relentless and methodical. Sometimes it came in groups of 3, sometimes in longer, more erratic sequences that sounded almost like Morse code. I couldn't decipher any message, but the intent was unmistakable. This was communication. I tried to film it, wanted to record every sound, every rhythm, but my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold the camera steady. Most of what I captured was a blur of ceiling tiles and panic breathing. Still, I kept trying, kept listening. As the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, the shadows across the roof grew longer and deeper, swallowing the light inch by inch. And with the dying of the day, the attic grew louder, much louder. The footsteps resumed, faster now, frenzied, agitated. A frantic pacing that shook dust loose from the rafters. The scratching intensified to the point where it no longer sounded like claws or nails, but like teeth tearing at wood. Beneath it all, the low-frequency vibration returned, stronger than ever, humming with such intensity that it made my jaw ache and my vision pulse. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was something you felt deep in the chest cavity and behind the eyes. And then I saw the depressions begin to spread. What had started as a few isolated dips in the shingles now expanded rapidly. A quarter of the roof was affected, waves of warped material rising and falling like the surface of a turbulent sea. It defied logic. There was no weight to cause such distortion, no visible force. And yet the structure groaned under invisible pressure. I watched, frozen, as new depressions formed faster than I could count. It was as though a crowd had gathered in the attic. Not one or two entities, dozens, maybe hundreds, all of them pressing up against the ceiling, reaching, demanding. That's when the first shingle cracked. A single splintering line, no more than an inch long, but it split right through the center of one of the deeper impressions. I heard it more than I saw it. A dry, splintering pop like brittle bone. The crack widened, slowly, revealing the black void of the attic beneath. No light spilled from the gap, even though daylight still lingered and there were old ventilation slats in the rafters. The space below was utterly dark. And then, from that narrow fracture, I heard breathing. Not panting, not gasping. It was slow, deep, deliberate, controlled, as though whatever was producing it was trying to stay calm, trying to stay hidden. It was wrong, too slow, too rhythmic. The inhalations and exhalations were measured in a way that didn't feel human. It sounded like the breathing of something larger, something ancient, something that didn't need to pretend anymore. More cracks appeared. One by one, the shingles gave way. Each one split open with a sickening creak, and through every new hole came more breathing. Until it wasn't one entity anymore, it was a chorus. An entire congregation of unseen beings, drawing breath in perfect synchronization. The sound was hypnotic, like a chant with no words. I realized, with rising horror, that I had begun unconsciously matching their rhythm, my own lungs falling into sync with theirs. And that's when I knew I had to make a decision. The roof was failing. The structural integrity was gone. And worse, my mental state was fraying like rotted rope. But even then, the thought of leaving the house felt wrong. Impossible, as if whatever was in the attic had fastened some invisible thread to my spine, pulling me gently, insistently, toward it. Couldn't walk away, so I went inside. The front door opened easily. I still had Grandpa's spare key from years ago, back when I helped him move out after his stroke. The interior was untouched, preserved like a memory suspended in amber. The same faded floral wallpaper lined the hall. The old grandfather clock still stood in its corner, silent since before I was born. The air was heavy with lavender, dust, and the scent of old books. But it wasn't the same. Something had changed. The atmosphere was thick, almost syrupy. Every sound was muffled, distorted. My footsteps on the hardwood echoed strangely, as though the house was larger on the inside. Vast and empty like a cathedral abandoned mid-sermon. I climbed the stairs. At the end of the upper hallway was the attic access panel, a pull-down ladder I remembered from childhood. I stood beneath it for a long time, flashlight in hand, listening. The footsteps above had slowed again, measured, patient, but heavier now, as though the thing pacing above was no longer trying to hide, as if it had grown confident, sure of itself. The breathing continued, slow and steady. Waiting, I pulled the ladder down. It unfolded with a reluctant creak. I climbed slowly, every step feeling like a countdown to some unspoken moment. The attic was vast, bigger than I remembered. Dust hung thick in the beam of my flashlight, forming columns in the air like underwater sediment. Cobwebs clung to every corner. Boxes of forgotten belongings slumped against the rafters. I heard something new, soft, like fabric rustling, wings, maybe, folding and unfolding in the darkness above me. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I backed toward the ladder, sweeping the attic space with frantic movements. Then the beam caught more scratched words, dozens of them, scattered across the attic floor and walls. Trapped, forgotten, waiting, lonely, each one carved with obsessive care, desperate and pleading, like prayers sent into silence. Just as I reached the opening in the floor, my light landed on one last message, larger and newer than the rest. The wood was still pale around the edges, freshly gouged. "Thank you for listening." I fled. I yanked the ladder up with shaking hands and descended to the hallway below, heart pounding. But I hadn't left the sounds behind. They were still with me, following. The footsteps had left the attic and now tracked through the house, matching my pace, always just behind. They stayed with me as I ran down the stairs, out the door, across the yard. Even as I drove away, they echoed faintly behind me, distant but steady, as if I'd pulled something loose from that house. Something that wasn't ready to be alone again. That was 3 weeks ago. I hired a contractor to finish the roof repairs, telling him the job had simply overwhelmed me. He completed the work in 2 days without issue. The only thing he noticed was minor damage to the attic floor, old wood and moisture, he said. Nothing unusual, but I still hear them. Late at night, in my apartment, I hear footsteps pacing above me with that same slow, patient rhythm. I live on the top floor. The unit above has been vacant for months. My landlord swears it's empty. My neighbors haven't heard a thing. I've tried telling myself it's echoes, psychological trauma, auditory hallucinations, but I know better. I know that something followed me home from that attic. Something that had been alone for a very long time and isn't anymore. Sometimes, when the footsteps stop directly above my bed, I hear breathing slow, careful, deliberate, waiting, as if it's listening again, as if it wants me to acknowledge it. And the worst part? I'm not sure I want to be alone anymore. There's something strangely comforting about it now. That presence. Carved desperate messages into wooden floors. Followed my voice, my movement with absolute faith. It listens. Last night, I found myself scratching a word into the top of my nightstand with a screwdriver. Hello. This morning, in the thin layer of dust beneath my window, I found a reply scratched by an unseen hand. Hello, friend. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if I've truly brought something with me. But I do know this. I'm not alone in my apartment anymore. And somehow that brings me as much relief as it does terror. Because now at least something else knows I'm here. Story 4, Room 247. The brass plaque by the front entrance should have been a warning. The Meridian Hotel, established 1923, renovated 2018. Formerly, St. Catherine's Military Hospital. But I was exhausted, 3 hours of sleep and enough caffeine to kill a horse. I barely registered the words as I dragged my suitcase through the heavy glass doors. The corporate retreat was mandatory, and I'd drawn the short straw for accommodations. While my colleagues enjoyed the Hilton downtown, I was booked into this forgotten relic on the city's edge. Budget constraints, my assistant had said. The irony wasn't lost on me, a structural engineer, staying in a building that had likely witnessed more death than most cemeteries. The lobby still bore traces of its institutional past, soaring ceilings with exposed beams, painted in that unsettling sterile white. The terrazzo floors echoed each footstep, and the flickering fluorescent lights cast everything in a washed-out, surgical pallor. The young clerk behind the desk didn't look up as she slid the key card across the counter. Room 247, she said. Elevators are around the corner. Breakfast is from 6 to 10. I wanted to ask about the building's history, but her eyes never met mine. Something in her posture, shoulders tight, fingers tapping nervously, discouraged conversation. The hallways stretched out like veins in a dead limb, long, pale, and silent. The elevator groaned its way to the second floor, the cabin shuddering at each stop. I couldn't help but run mental calculations on weight tolerances and stress points. Old habits. Room 247 sat at the very end of the corridor, isolated by several feet of wall on either side. The key card didn't work at first. On the third try, the lock clicked open, and a wave of stale air rolled out. Not cold, but heavy, as if it carried memory. The room was larger than expected, its high ceiling echoing faintly. 2 tall windows overlooked the parking lot and a field beyond it. empty except for a line of bare, skeletal trees. The furniture looked off. The nightstand still bore the marks of repurposing. Former hospital equipment with the wheels removed, legs crudely bolted on. I unpacked methodically, trying to ground myself. My thermal imaging camera, on loan from the office, went on the dresser next to my laptop. It was meant for a project downtown, analyzing insulation and heat loss. But now it felt oddly appropriate. Dinner was lonely. The hotel restaurant had 3 patrons, including me. The waitress, an older woman with eyes that didn't linger, refilled my water with trembling hands. "How long was this place empty?" I asked. 20 years, she replied. "After they shut down the hospital. Why renovate it now?" She just shook her head. "Some places are better left alone." I wanted to ask more, but she moved quickly to the next table and didn't return. Back in my room, I tried to focus on emails, but the building wouldn't let me. Every creak and hum felt intentional, like breath drawn in and held just a moment too long. The pipes groaned in rhythmic intervals. The heating system clicked on and off in patterns I couldn't ignore. Too steady, too familiar, like a pulse. Even the ice machine down the hall seemed to exhale. By 11, I gave up. The shower took too long to heat, and when it finally did, the pressure danced erratically, up and down as if someone else were using the water in time with me. I checked the fixtures. Nothing wrong. Everything looked right. But something wasn't. Something isn't. And I can't help but feel that whatever this building used to be, some part of it never left. Some part still breathes, still watches, still waits. The room is dark. The only light comes from faint LEDs on electronics. The bed lies in shadow. Silence except for the distant hum of HVAC. The protagonist lies motionless beneath the covers, eyes wide in the gloom. Action. The water in the bathroom had fluctuated wildly, scalding to lukewarm without warning. Now the room lies still. He lays down, grateful for the darkness that hides the sterile, institutional details. The mattress is more comfortable than expected. Sleep begins to claim him until he feels it. A subtle depression near his feet, as if someone has sat down gently. I snap open. Nothing. No sound. No movement. Just darkness. He waits. The sensation fades. He shifts. The mattress responds normally. No dip. No weight. Sleep becomes fragmented. He drifts, then wakes to nonsense sounds. Footsteps that cease when he listens. Whispers mistaken for air conditioning. A looming presence that vanishes when acknowledged. Around 2 a.m., it happens again. The depression is more distinct, 3 feet to his right. He lies frozen. The bed subtly sags, as if someone settles in carefully. The pressure lasts 30 seconds. Then, nothing. He clicks on the bedside lamp, examines the mattress. Nothing unusual. He presses the foam, compresses, recovers, again and again. Each occurrence spaced 60 to 90 minutes apart. Always a new position, by the feet, near the waist, never closer. Calculated. By the 5th time, he retrieves the thermal imaging camera. Silent, precise. He hides it under the blanket, watching the screen. The room displays as expected. Blues and greens, with his own form glowing orange-red. Walls cool, windows colder, vents warm, his body the heat core. Normal. Until 5:20 a.m. 7 distinct cold spots appear on the screen. 6 feet long. 3 feet off the floor. Hovering. Human in outline, arms by sides. Arranged in a perfect circle around the bed. Not random. Not possible. A hospital ward formation. One cold form stirs. From lying down to sitting. The movement slow, precise. It matches what he's felt all night. Then another sits up. Then another. All face him. Each cold as void, absorbing heat. Not emitting. Shapes unmistakably human, but wrong. Far too cold. The camera doesn't lie. It records radiation. Not dreams. Not imagination. No other equipment anomalies. No structural interference. Nothing explainable. They stay until dawn. Watching. Unmoving. Only shifting enough to match the mattress depressions he'd felt. When the sunlight finally touches the window, they vanish. Fade into ambient temperature. Gone. He downloads every frame. Carefully. Relentlessly. The camera's data irrefutable. Monologue. I understood something that morning I hadn't the night before. The data didn't lie. 7 cold forms. Human in shape. Arranged with military precision around my bed. They'd remained there for hours, watching, observing. The waitress from the night before brought me coffee. Her hands shook in the morning light. When I mentioned trouble sleeping, she leaned closer and whispered, "Room 247 was the trauma ward. They say some folks never checked out." I asked for more, but she was already gone, retreating behind normalcy. The other guests ate breakfast like nothing was wrong. They'd slept through the night. I spent the morning buried in archives. St. Catherine's Military Hospital, 1923 to 1995. 3 wars. Critical care. Room 247 had been for patients who needed constant monitoring. The hotel's renovations had preserved the room layout. Distances between beds, sightlines to nurses' stations, emergency access. But that didn't explain what the camera captured. Dead men don't give off electromagnetic radiation. Empty air doesn't form military patterns. I left that afternoon. The checkout was rushed. The clerk didn't meet my eyes. When I asked about the history, she just shrugged. Have a pleasant drive. Now the camera sits on my desk in the rational world of building codes and structural loads. But the data remains, archived, time-stamped, unaltered. 7 cold forms positioned exactly as hospital beds would have been, maintaining their silent watch. My coworkers are back from their retreat. They ask about the hotel. I joke about old plumbing, thin walls. How do you explain what you can't make sense of? The camera doesn't imagine. It records. Yet what it recorded doesn't belong in our world. Some nights I feel those phantom depressions again. I reach for the camera. Nothing. Just normal suburban heat. But the memory lingers. The image of them. I thought about going back. Just to check. Just to see if it would happen again. But I haven't made the reservation. I'm not sure I want to know. Because if the signatures appear again, or worse, change, what would that mean? Maybe it's equipment failure, or psychology. But I trust the tools. I trust data. And the data shows me something I cannot explain. So I keep reviewing the footage, frame by frame, looking for errors, looking for something normal. But I find only those 7 forms. Waiting, still, watching, perhaps bound by duty, or something darker. And sometimes, in the deep quiet before dawn, I wonder if they're still there in room 247, keeping their vigil, for the next guest, for the next event, or perhaps, for me. Harmony's eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, she stared at something just over my shoulder, her expression frozen, fixed on a spot behind me. I followed her gaze, turning toward the mirror, expecting to find something, anything, that might explain her intensity. But the room behind me was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, she was no longer looking past me. She was looking directly at me, straight into my eyes. There was something in that gaze, something that made the air feel dense and hard to inhale, as if the space between us had thickened. And then, for the first time, I saw her face clearly. It was my face, not a resemblance, not a trick of the light or some distortion in the glass. It was unmistakably mine. But the expression, one of desperate warning, was foreign to me. I'd never seen that look in my own mirror, and her uniform was wrong, outdated, formal, like something a servant might wear in the 1930s. Everything about her, except the face, felt out of place. I staggered backward, knocking over a paint can someone had left behind. White latex spilled across the floor, creeping outward in a slow bloom. In the mirror, I saw the other me step carefully around a matching spill. Only hers existed in reflection alone. We were moving in perfect sync. First, then something shifted. I wasn't controlling both sets of movements anymore. Sometimes I moved first. Other times, the reflection did. We were alternating, taking turns being real. I ran. I didn't bother packing my equipment. Left behind lenses, cameras, gear worth thousands. The foreman shouted after me, alarmed by the look on my face, but I didn't stop. How could I begin to explain what had happened? At home, I avoided mirrors entirely. I brushed my teeth facing the wall, shaved without looking, but it's impossible to avoid your own reflection forever. Eventually, I slipped. One morning, I glanced at the bathroom cabinet and saw myself again, in that uniform with that same stiff, poised posture, like domestic staff trained to disappear into the background. The face staring back was mine, yes, but full of recognition and fear, as though it understood what was happening. As though it was me, but trapped. The Blackwood estate called twice. They asked when I'd be returning to finish the project. I didn't answer. A week later, they left another message, this time about retrieving my abandoned equipment. I told them to donate it. Then came the final call from the Historical Society. They'd found something inside the house, concealed behind the master bedroom mirror. A hidden cavity, sealed since a previous renovation in 1934. Inside were personal effects, glass photographic plates, a camera. The plates showed the same rooms I had photographed, captured from nearly identical angles. And in the background of each, barely visible in the grain, was a figure in uniform. The same uniform I'd seen in the mirror. The same face. My face. They asked if I might be related to the original photographer. The name was the same. Exactly the same. Even the handwriting on the old work order matched mine, letter for letter. I told them I'd never heard of anyone by that name. But that wasn't true. Because now, late at night, when I catch glimpses of myself in dark windows or the gleam of polished metal, I still see it, that uniform, that stiff posture, that perfect synchronization. And I understand now. Somewhere out there, another photographer is documenting a house, becoming more and more disturbed by the mirror's refusal to behave, watching a figure that looks just like him but isn't quite him move out of step. The delay is shrinking for him too. Soon there will be no delay at all. And when that happens, he'll understand what I've come to know. We are all reflections. Refractions of someone else's life, someone else's memory, someone else's truth. The question isn't whether what we see in mirrors is real. The question is whether we are. Interior, Blackwood Estate Day. A dilapidated Victorian mansion groaning beneath decades of silence. Dust motes drift through stale sunlight. Restoration workers hammer distantly in the west wing. The atmosphere is soaked in melancholic weight. Action. The narrator, a photographer in his 30s, moves through the empty rooms of the Blackwood estate. Camera slung around his shoulder, he meticulously documents the decay. Cracked medallions, curling wallpaper, for a historical restoration archive. Mirrors line nearly every room, some monstrous in scale, others delicate antiques. He positions himself carefully, mindful of angles to avoid self-reflection. In the main parlor, he lowers his camera mid-shot. His eyes widen. A woman stands behind him, visible only in the mirror. He spins around. Nothing, just dust and silence. But when he peers again through the viewfinder, the woman is there, faint, dressed in an indeterminate uniform. Her movements echo his own. With a delay, the lag shortens with each encounter, her synchronicity nearing perfection. She appears in the bookcases, in tarnished silver, in the vanity mirror of the master bedroom, always behind him, always watching. He times the lag, 3 seconds, then 2, then 1.5. Panic simmers beneath logic. He flees early, citing equipment issues. That night, he pores over photos. She's in none of them, only seen live, through glass, through mirrors, through him. He researches obsessively. Blackwood's past is fragmented: residence, asylum, school. One article from 1934 hints at disappearances, staff irregularities. Cuts off mid-sentence. He returns the next morning with a hand mirror. Conducts tests. In the hall, he angles the hand mirror toward a larger one. Infinity, mirror reflecting mirror. In each layer, she stands behind him. In some she lags. In others, she synchronizes. In the farthest reflection, she moves first. The mirror drops, shatters. By noon, the lag is half a second. By afternoon, it's imperceptible. She's almost real-time, almost him. The foreman mentions casually, 2 previous photographers quit abruptly. One lasted 2 days. One lasted 1. On the 3rd day, the narrator confronts the mirror, faces her, asks who she is, what she wants, whether she's real. She mirrors every gesture. Perfect symmetry, except her eyes. Monologue. The first time I saw her, I thought my camera had malfunctioned. I'd been documenting the Blackwood Estate's restoration for 3 weeks. Routine work, the kind that covers rent while waiting for life to mean something. The mirrors were always a hassle. Giant, gilt-framed beasts, or dainty little vanities crammed into corners. They meant extra care, angles, reflections, reshoots. I was used to seeing my own reflection ghosting into the frame. But in the parlor, I lowered my camera because I didn't see me. I saw her. She stood behind me, a woman in a dark uniform. Could have been a maid's dress, or something from the house's sanitarium days. I spun around. Nothing. Just dust, sunbeams, and the groan of tired wood. I looked again through the viewfinder. She was still there. Blurred features, rigid posture, moving not freely but echoing. When I shifted, she followed. After a delay, 2 seconds, maybe 3, my mind whispered explanations. Warped glass, pareidolia, sleep deprivation. But she kept showing up. The library, the dining room, the vanity, always in something reflective, always delayed but getting quicker. By the master bedroom, the lag was down to seconds. 1.5. She was almost in sync with me. I left early, downloaded the photos. No woman, just me, always just me. That night, I searched Blackwood's history like my sanity depended on it. The records were a mess. The house had been a home, a school, an asylum, but nothing solid. One old newspaper clipping, 1934, mentioned strange staff departures, possible abuse. The article ended mid-sentence. No names, no women in uniform, nothing about mirrors that lagged behind reality. I went back, brought a mirror, held it in the hallway. Nothing, just my own exhausted face. Then I turned it, a mirror reflecting a mirror. Infinite regress. She was in every layer. Behind me, all of them in sync. Or not. The closest reflection lagged a second behind. The next closer, further back, perfect synchronization. And the final distant speck moved first. I dropped the mirror, shattered like thin ice. After that, I avoided reflections, taped over my camera screen, used the viewfinder only, kept my eyes front. But it was impossible in that house. Mirrors on every wall, windows reflecting everything. Even doorknobs caught flickers. She was always there, watching, syncing, catching up. By noon, the delay was nearly gone. By afternoon, we moved as one. I started small talk with the foreman. Weather, delays, anything to remind myself I still existed. He mentioned the other photographers. One quit after 2 days, one after one. Neither finished the job. On the 3rd day, I faced her. I stood in front of the vanity and spoke aloud. Who are you? What do you want? Are you real? My reflection mouthed the words. Hers did not. But when I raised my right hand, she raised her left. When I tilted my head, she mirrored the opposite angle. We moved together, perfectly, except for her eyes. They didn't follow mine. They watched me. Sometimes the patterns repeated. Sometimes they evolved, building on prior sequences, as if someone or something below was teaching me a language I had no desire to learn. I brought it up once with the landlord during a rare encounter in the building's cramped lobby. Marcus Kellerman, according to his business card, the great-grandson of the original blacksmith, twitched visibly when I mentioned the noise. Old buildings settle, he said, avoiding my gaze, especially ones with this much history. It was the way he'd paused before history that stayed with me. It lodged itself in my thoughts like a splinter. Have other tenants reported anything strange? I asked. His laugh came out tight and strangled. You're the first tenant to last more than 6 weeks in 20 years. I should have moved out then. Packed my laptop, a bag of clothes, and found a place with thin walls and noisy neighbors. Somewhere the silence didn't feel like a breath held too long, waiting to be broken. But I didn't. I became obsessed. I started documenting the patterns, transcribing each one into a notebook with precise timestamps and durations. The hammering followed a logic I couldn't quite grasp, but felt constantly on the edge of understanding, like a word just beyond reach, lingering on the tip of the tongue. Some sequences lasted minutes, others only seconds, but all of them felt deliberate. The breakthrough came during a particularly frustrating afternoon when I was trying to finish a user manual for enterprise software. The hammering had gone on for an hour straight, complex rhythms that built toward something, then abruptly reset, like I had missed a crucial cue. In a moment that teetered between desperation and madness, I grabbed a hammer from beneath the kitchen sink and struck the floor. 3 measured blows, replicating the last sequence I'd heard. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was expectant. Then, from below, a new pattern began. Slow, deliberate, each strike separated by exactly 3 seconds. It repeated 4 times, then stopped. My hand trembled as I wrote it down. Felt like a reply. That was the beginning. From then on, I engaged. Each day, the patterns grew more elaborate. What had started as call and response shifted into something instructional. The entity, I had stopped pretending it was just pipes or old beams, would deliver a sequence, wait, then offer a correction or variation. It was teaching me, not how to build anything physical, but how to forge something that existed beyond the material, something conceptual, something vibrational. And over weeks of recorded patterns, the truth crystallized with unbearable clarity. I was crafting a key, not one for doors or locks, but a key to silence itself. The sequences were instructions, blueprints for an object made not of metal, but of intention. A thing shaped by repetition and will. My notebook filled with increasingly complex diagrams. Impossible geometries that seemed to shimmer when I wasn't looking directly at them, and measurements that changed when I turned my head. The hammering evolved beyond sound. Now it included intensity, duration, angle, each aspect meaningful, though I couldn't explain how. I understood it not intellectually, but in my bones. The night I finally forged the key, the building felt different. The air was heavy, metallic on the tongue. Every creak was sharp, every shadow impossibly deep. The silence between each hammer strike stretched taut, as though something massive waited for release. I worked for 3 hours, striking the floor in the learned sequences, half trance, half ritual. My neighbors, if any still remained, would have thought I'd lost my mind. But I could feel it forming around me. Not physically, no. There was nothing I could touch. But its presence was undeniable. It existed in the space between sounds, a structure born of echo and intent. A skeleton key that could, perhaps, lock the sound away. When I used it, through some gesture I instinctively understood, the silence that followed was perfect. Not absence of noise, but pure silence. Sacred. I had craved that silence since the day I moved in. It lasted 72 hours. Then the hammering returned. Only this time I understood. I hadn't silenced it. I'd helped it. The key hadn't sealed anything. It had opened a way. The sequences I'd followed were not instructions, but a summoning. The strikes came now with a new force, each one heavier than sound, vibrating through walls and bone. The thing below had been waiting for someone to complete the pattern, to forge the final shape, to make contact. I tried to leave, packed my belongings, made arrangements with movers, even signed a lease elsewhere. But each time I reached the threshold, the hammering began again. Frantic, insistent, full of warning. The patterns had changed. They weren't a conversation anymore. They were commands. During the day, I could pretend, tell myself it was isolation, stress, architectural acoustics. The rational mind is good at rewriting horror into something palatable. But at night, when the building settled into its true shape, I knew better. Because something was awake in the dark beneath my feet. And it was waiting. The Hartwell property had been on the market for 8 months by the time I first stepped through its front door. 8 long months of price reductions, failed inspections, and potential buyers who turned and left within 20 minutes, never offering a reason. Marcus Hartwell, the seller, maintained there was nothing wrong with the house. Fresh paint throughout, brand new fixtures, excellent condition, he repeated, as if the problem was everyone else's imagination. But houses don't sit that long without reason. When a place lingers like a wounded animal, something's off. The smell struck me before I even finished my introduction. It wasn't the comforting scent of old wood or the faint tang of fresh varnish. It was wrong, acrid. The unmistakable stench of melted plastic mingled with something darker, heavier, charred meat. Maybe. It hung thick in the narrow hallway that linked the living room to the kitchen, a corridor just wide enough for two people to pass shoulder to shoulder. I faltered, my rehearsed pitch about square footage stalling mid-sentence. "Everything all right?" Hartwell asked. His voice was neutral, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He was wiry, mid-50s, and radiated a restless energy, fidgeting with his collar, smoothing down already flat hair, as if trying to polish himself into credibility. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, a reflex I'd picked up after years of touring poorly lit homes. The beam carved through the dim interior, and then I saw them. The walls weren't blank. They were covered in black markings, intricate patterns that curled and twisted like ancient calligraphy, a fusion of Arabic geometry and Celtic knots. But these weren't painted on. They emerged from within the surface itself, as though fire had etched them into the drywall from inside. In the flashlight's glow, the lines seemed to pulse, subtly contracting and expanding like something breathing. "The walls?" I began, but Hartwell was already shaking his head. "White throughout," he interrupted, too quickly. "Fresh coat just last month. Benjamin Moore's Swiss coffee. Got the receipt if you want." I blinked. When I looked again, the walls were pure white, pristine, spotless, sterile. Not a single blemish. Still, the smell lingered. "Could be something in the vents?" I muttered, though I'd never encountered anything like it. "When was the HVAC last serviced?" Hartwell laughed, sharp and sudden, with no warmth. "Just last week. Everything's working perfectly." The rest of the showing passed like a dream. I moved from room to room, inspecting plumbing, checking light switches, measuring door frames, all the little rituals that made a place marketable. On paper, the house was flawless. Crown moldings, refinished hardwood floors, soft closed drawers. But each time I walked back through that hallway, my skin prickled. The smell grew stronger, and always, just at the edge of my vision, those twisting black designs returned. Never visible when I stared directly, only in my periphery. By the time I returned to my car, the October afternoon had grown cold. I sat there a long while, breath fogging the windshield, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Real estate teaches you to read a house the way a doctor reads a body. You learn to spot rot behind fresh paint, sadness embedded in the furniture arrangements, desperation disguised as open floor plans. But this was something else. Without thinking, I pulled out my leather-bound notebook. I'd used it for years to sketch layouts, note square footage, list renovation ideas. But this time, my hand didn't hesitate. Pen met paper, and I began to draw fluid strokes, confident curves, spirals, knots, lattices. The pattern emerged as if recalled from memory, not invented. Half a page vanished beneath a design so intricate it almost shimmered. Beautiful in the way forest fires can be beautiful. A beauty that tightens your chest. That night, I dreamed of smoke. Not fire, just the thick, choking presence of it. It threaded through my sleep like a living thing. The next morning, I had 3 new listings and a closing that should have consumed all my attention.